The strange phenomenon of voter self-suppression. From the moment the president announced the creation of a panel to examine voter fraud and elections, voting rights advocates warned that the real purpose of the commission was to suppress lawful votes. Then a series of reports from around the country over the last 2 weeks played directly into those fears, as voting officials in several states said citizens had been calling and asking to have their registrations canceled, rather than turned over to the commission as part of a huge request for data. Instances popped from Florida to Washington state and North Carolina to Colorado. The good news is that so far there don't actually seem to be that many cases of voters actually canceling, with most of them concentrated in Colorado, though nearly 4,000 people have withdrawn there, enough to swing a close election. Yet even if the scale of the problem is not great, the phenomenon of Americans willingly surrendering one of their most fundamental political rights in order to protect their privacy is a worrying one that touches on the future of voting in the United States as well as on the question of how public records like voter rolls should function in the Internet age. In charging that the commission is aimed at suppressing votes, critics have noted that it was created to answer an illusory problem of illegal voting. Its de facto leader, Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach, has a history of attempting to disenfranchise legitimate voters and wrote in a recently divulged email that he wants to enact stricter registration requirements, and the methods it appears to be considering are both methodologically unsound and risk exposing private data. Cancellations by privacy-minded citizens represent extremely effective voter suppression. Simply by requesting voter rolls from states, the election panel has convinced people to take themselves out of the voting game. Keeping people from registering is a venerable voter suppression technique. It was a staple of the Jim Crow South, achieved by placing barriers like poll taxes and literacy tests in the way of, or simply intimidating, would-be registrants, but this would be a modern and streamlined way to achieve the same result. Kobach, a longtime crusader for stricter voting laws whose penchant for producing false positives for supposed fraudulent votes has become a leitmotif, embraced the idea that the commission is already causing voter self-suppression. In an interview with Breitbart, he speculated that those with concerns were actually the fraudulent voters. "It's interesting, he said. It could be a number of things. It could be, actually, people who are not qualified to vote, perhaps someone who is a felon and is disqualified that way, or someone who is not a U.S. citizen saying, 'I am withdrawing my voter registration because I am not able to vote.'" The epicenter for voter withdrawal is Colorado, where almost 4,000 voters had canceled their registrations as of earlier this week. Amber McReynolds, the director of the City of Denver's Elections Division, estimated that 700 to 800 of those were in the Mile High City. "I've been reading through a lot of emails, and I spoke to voters myself. They've absolutely been stating it's because of privacy concerns, she said. It's very disheartening. I've done this for over 12 years. I never thought I would come to work and see more withdrawals in a week than registrations. But Colorado is an outlier, at least so far. In Pasco County, Florida, for example, Elections Supervisor Brian Corley said the number of concerned citizens getting in touch had surprised him. "It's really surreal, to be honest with you," he said. But he told me that he and his staff had been begging voters not to cancel registrations, and that as far as he knew, those pleas were successful. Only 3 Pasco County voters out of some 350,000 had actually canceled their registrations. Officials in some other jurisdictions also reported that despite widespread concern about the Trump Commission's request, they weren't seeing an unusually large number of canceled registrations. The North Carolina State Board of Elections and Ethics Enforcement has received hundreds if not thousands of messages of concern about the Elections Commission, spokesman Patrick Gannon said, and at least one person has written to the board asking to cancel their registration because of the collection. But he said the state board doesn't have a tally of how many cancellations have occurred, because counties handle both registration and withdrawal. Elections officials in several of the state's largest counties said they hadn't seen an unusual number of cancellations. In Guilford County, home to Greensboro and High Point, there hasn't been a noticeable uptick. In Durham County, There have been 8 cancellations by voters for any reason in July, out of 220 registrations removed from the rolls overall. Mecklenburg County's Elections Board, which covers Charlotte, said about 5 voters have called a day recently inquiring about withdrawal. Wake County, Raleigh, hasn't seen any uptick in withdrawals, despite many complaints about the panel, either. Voters can choose to offer a reason when they cancel a registration, but they don't have to. Nor has Washington seen many cancellations. We have had only a handful of people who have responded to the Election Commission's request for data. Call our office or email our office and inquire about disenrolling from the database, said Eric Hebel, spokesman for the Washington Secretary of State. He said his office had received thousands of emails, plus hundreds more phone calls and social media contacts. Of all of those, I would say maybe a dozen to 2 dozen specifically asked about disenrollment, he said. Ebel pointed out that Washington just reached an all-time high for voter registration. One factor in Colorado is that the state has made much of its registration system easily available online. A voter can complete the registration process from his web browser. But he can also easily withdraw his registration on the same site, meaning Coloradans who decide to withdraw don't encounter the friction of filling out a paper form, nor do they have to call a Board of Elections official who might try to them out of it. Another big difference in Colorado seems to be that the Office of the Secretary of State actually recommended that people cancel their registrations and then re-register later if they were concerned about privacy. I heard that and I thought, why would they ever suggest that? McReynolds told me.